No problem. Thank you all very, very much for that great panel. And there was an awful lot there. But one thing when we talk about EU enlargement, I think we need to drill into rule of law in the European Union. And I'm hoping that our keynote speech by Vera Iourova, the Vice President of the European Commission, with a portfolio of values and transparency, will dig into that. Because we can talk about rule of law in candidate countries, but I spend a lot of my time in Hungary and Poland, for example, and there are deep questions about the rule of law in those member states as well. So is Madam Jourová up? Do we have her? No, we don't. So I'm going to talk a little bit more here as well. I don't really know. How did everyone enjoy that panel? Does anyone have any gripe with the EU enlargement process that they just want to shout out and get it off their chest? Because there is an awful lot. And I think that one of the things, for me, I've spent quite a bit of time talking to Moldovans and Ukrainians recently about the EU enlargement process. And they have told me that one thing that they really think that is going to happen very, very quickly for them. And I think one thing that isn't really relayed is that this is going to take a very, very long time for Ukraine and Moldova. And then I think as well, adding on to this conversation, is the enlargement of the EU is ultimately going to change the EU itself. And I think we need to start having very frank and honest conversations about what an enlarged European Union is going to look like, what its voting systems are going to look like. And I think that that's something that we need to start now rather than down the line, because there was talk there about North Macedonia and Bulgaria. And I don't think that one member state blocking up the entire process can't keep happening as we go forward. So that's all I have to say about EU enlargement. Do we have Ms. Jourová? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so Madam Jourová is going to speak for 15 minutes, and she'll be touching on her portfolio and in relation to the Western Balkans. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to discuss these important issues. I am absolutely certain that democracy is under the attack of autocracy, both within the Union's borders and, as we have seen in Ukraine, beyond those borders. Indeed, the unjustified Russian war of aggression against Ukraine shows that democracies and fundamental rights are under threat. Unfortunately, resurgent authoritarian regimes are not afraid to resort to the use of force to pursue their own goals, and this will not change in the next future. In this difficult and uncertain context, promoting democracy and the rule of law and defending fundamental rights is more important than ever. These values are what makes us different from autocracies like the regime in the Kremlin. And their promotion applies to our relations with enlargement countries, as well as with our broader neighborhood and beyond. This is not about ideology or some abstract goals. As someone who spent most of her life in authoritarian Czechoslovakia, the democratic values are tangible rights and freedoms to every citizen. So I am convinced about that based on my own experience. We, as Czechs and Slovaks, wanted to join the EU, to have these rights and freedoms guaranteed and enshrined in law. This conference theme is about the future of Europe, and I have no doubts that the Western Balkan countries belong to the EU. It will have to be a collective effort of citizens, authorities, EU institutions, partner countries, and member states. But I have no illusion that we depend on each other for our mutual security and prosperity. I think it is worth asking a question why authoritarianism is so dangerous. There are many reasons, from individual oppressions to the desire to control every aspect of our life. But I think most importantly, authoritarian rules do not count with the opinion of people. They do not care about their prosperity. If they cannot rule by popularity, they will rule by fear. The authoritarian rules think that the state and his faith are equal. This is why they cannot be trusted in the international fora. Putin's regime tries to rewrite established borders despite what was agreed about Europe's security architecture. If we let him, he will not stop there. This is why our duty to support Ukraine is not stemming from empathy alone. It is in our own self-interest to reject the rule by force and to promote the rule of law instead. So how do we translate this into practice? For the enlargement countries, this means having stable democratic systems that respect the rule of law and fundamental rights at the very core of the EU accession process. Our latest annual assessment, released earlier this month, calls on our partners to do more to eradicate corruption, to fight organized crime, and to ensure coherent and consistent efforts to contain and effectively address elements of state capture. In the context of the accession negotiations, the functioning of democratic institutions is now part of the so-called fundamentals cluster, along with the rule of law, the economic criteria, and public administration reform. Progress made on these fundamentals will determine the overall pace of negotiations. The EU will open accession negotiations with this cluster, and negotiations will only be closed once all necessary progress is achieved. Creating a stable democratic system also means putting in place an effective framework for preventing corruption. That is why anti-corruption policies are key in the process of the negotiations. We will also pay particular attention to empowering civil society. Civil society organizations in the enlargement countries are generally, according to the law, free to operate and carry out their activities. But the legal framework needs to be further improved and consistently implemented. This includes, for example, registration processes, enhancing transparency of public funding, and conditions for volunteering. In addition, the protection of media freedom is key to ensure accountability of those in power and proper information and choice for the people. Accountable governments and democratic institutions are crucial not only for the EU's accession process, but most of all to ensure benefits for the citizens of the candidate countries. This is why we will continue to support our partners in this area, in enlargement countries and our neighborhood alike. This is a very important message also to our friends in the Western Balkan countries. But we can only preach to others on the rule of law if we keep our own house in order. And indeed, the rule of law is central to the proper functioning of the EU, be it its area of freedom, security and justice, or our internal market. Threats to the rule of law challenge the legal, political, and economic basis of the EU. Deficiencies in one member state will have an impact on other member states and on the EU as a whole. And so none of us should ever become complacent. We can never take democracy and the rule of law for granted. This is why we are working on 3 fronts. 1, to promote a shared rule of law culture across the European Union. 2, to intervene early to prevent rule of law problems where they emerge. And 3, to respond effectively when we do identify significant problems in a member state. Over the past few years, we have gradually developed our rule of law toolbox to address the challenges we are facing at home. In 2020, we added a new tool to this toolbox, the annual rule of law report. Our third rule of law report, adopted in July this year, deepens our assessment. For the first time, we also make recommendations as to how each member state can address the problems we identify. And also, now more than ever, we must defend our fundamental rights and values. And more than ever, we realize how much fundamental rights matter for peace in our society. Fundamental rights are about recognizing and protecting every individual in society. They are about balancing and reconciling the rights and freedoms we all want to enjoy. Respect for fundamental rights also depends on the broader context, on a democracy worthy of the name, of the rule of law upheld in both letter and spirit by all authorities. The EU Charter of Fundamental Rights is our moral compass. It indicates one way to follow and prevents us from taking the wrong path. Our strategy also involves protecting and empowering civil society organizations and rights defenders, who are crucial for the well-functioning of our democracies. While we must nurture and uphold democratic values, we also have to be aware of the new and modern threats. One of the weapons in the arsenal of enemies of democracies is disinformation. After Russia's aggression on Ukraine, we are all witnessing a weaponization of disinformation as a constant feature of the European information space. The dehumanization of Ukrainians, blaming democracies for the increased food insecurity and high gas prices, justifying war crimes, just to name a few of the narratives which are heavily spread all over Europe and elsewhere. This is well-documented daily bread and butter of the pro-Kremlin media outlets, and since the war, also the social media accounts of official authorities. Over the past 2 years, we have proposed measures to promote free and fair elections, protect journalists, and fight disinformation and interference, all while fully protecting freedom of speech. We have also proposed measures to make funding sources of political advertising more transparent and to strengthen electoral resilience. As a next step, we will put forward a Defense of Democracy package. This will further strengthen the resilience of EU democratic infrastructure against covert and malign interference from foreign actors. This package will bring covert foreign influence and shady funding to light. The aim is not to stifle or shut down our pluralistic democratic debate. It is about protecting our democracies from entities funded by or linked to third countries that may impact public opinion and the democratic sphere. This package is about making sure that our elections are free and fair, supporting a pluralistic landscape of free media, and developing civic spaces and citizen participation to bolster our democratic resilience from within. In a nutshell, this is about ensuring that the rules of the democratic game are the same for everyone, regardless of their political views. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention. I am fully confident that we can work together with our partner countries in the Western Balkans to jointly defend our common values and our security. Thank you very much.